Officer Carter had dealt with his fair share of strange calls, wild animal sightings, trespassers, even the occasional ghost story spun by an old-timer who'd had one too many drinks. He'd learned to take them all with a grain of salt. But this one felt different. The man on the other end of the line sounded wrong. His voice wavered, teetering on the edge of panic, as if he were forcing himself to keep it steady. "It's not an animal," the man said. His name was Isaac B. Gay, a Navajo rancher who lived miles away from anything resembling civilization. "It watches from the trees, and it smiles." Carter rubbed at his temple, suppressing a sigh. Probably just a mountain lion, maybe a particularly bold coyote. He had seen enough scared families who mistook wild animals for something worse. Still, it was his job to check it out. "Has anyone been hurt?" he asked, flipping open his notepad. A pause. "No, but it's getting closer." The way he said it sent a sliver of unease down Carter's spine. "Closer?" Another pause, then quieter. "It was in the field last night, near the fence line, watching my house. It took 2 of my goats. No blood, no tracks, just gone." Carter frowned. A predator would leave remains, torn flesh, bones scattered in the dirt. But total disappearance? That was strange. Isaac exhaled heavily, as if choosing his next words carefully. "And tonight," he whispered, "it's at the trees. I can see it. I swear to God, it's watching me right now." Carter's grip on the receiver tightened. "What exactly are you seeing?" Another moment of silence. Then finally, eyes and a smile. The line went dead. Carter sat there for a moment, the unease gnawing at him. Ranchers didn't spook easily. If Isaac was afraid, then something was really out there. Outside, the desert night stretched endlessly, stars like pinpricks of silver over an ocean of black. The land was old out here, untouched in places, still belonging to something ancient and unknown. Carter grabbed his keys. Whatever was out there, mountain lion, coyote, or something else, it was his job to find out. He drove out toward the Begay Ranch, headlights cutting through the darkness, the hum of the road beneath him the only sound. The night felt too still, the usual chirping of crickets absent. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote should have howled. But the land was silent. Up ahead, the ranch came into view. A modest house, a few sheds, and beyond it, the dark line of trees. Carter's gut tightened. Isaac had said it was watching from the trees, and something was, 2 glowing yellow eyes staring at him from the tall grass, unblinking. Carter slammed the brakes. The thing didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Hand shaking slightly, he reached for his flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed the beam straight at the eyes. The grass rustled, and the eyes were gone. Carter's heartbeat pounded in his ears. The glow of those yellow eyes was seared into his mind, even though they were now gone. He kept the flashlight trained on the spot where they had been. The grass still swayed slightly, disturbed by whatever had been lurking there. A coyote, maybe? A bobcat? Their eyes sometimes caught the light like that. But there was no sound of retreat, no rustling of underbrush, no patter of paws through the dirt. Just the wind, dry and whispering through the empty landscape. Carter swallowed hard and stepped out of the cruiser, his boots crunching against the dirt road. The flashlight beam swept over the area. Nothing, no animal tracks, no sign of movement. He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to push down the unease rising in his chest. He had a job to do. Turning back toward the house, he noticed the front door cracked open. A single light flickered in the window. The whole house looked tense. It wasn't something he could explain, just a feeling, like the very walls had drawn in tight, bracing themselves. He made his way up the porch steps and knocked. A long pause. Then the door creaked open wider, revealing Isaac Begay. The man was tall and lean, with deep lines carved into his face from years of hard work under the sun. But right now he looked older, worn. His eyes were shadowed, his mouth a thin line of worry. "You called about something watching your property," Carter said, keeping his voice calm. "Can you tell me exactly what's been happening?" Isaac stepped aside, motioning him in. Carter hesitated, just for a second. Something in the air felt off, like stepping into a room where someone had just been talking about you. Still, he stepped inside. The house was dimly lit, the single overhead bulb casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The smell of burning sage lingered in the air. In the corner, Isaac's wife Lena sat rigid in a chair, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her gaze flicked to Carter but didn't linger. She looked afraid. Their son, a boy no older than 6, sat on the floor near the fireplace, dragging his finger through the dust on the wooden planks. He didn't look up as Carter entered. "Show him," Isaac said quietly. The boy hesitated. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he scratched one final mark into the dust and scooted back. Carter stepped closer and felt the first real chill of fear. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. A tall, twisted figure, hunched over on all fours, long limbs, elongated fingers, and the face, grinning, wide and sharp, stretching from one side of its head to the other. The boy's hand hovered over the image for a moment, then he whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "It's outside." Carter turned sharply toward the window. The fields beyond were nothing but shadow, but for a moment, just a moment, he swore he saw it, 2 pinpricks of yellow light deep within the tree line, watching and smiling. Carter's fingers hovered over the grip of his gun, an old instinct kicking in, but he didn't draw it, not yet. Through the window, the trees stood like jagged black teeth against the night sky, motionless in the dead air. Whatever had been watching them was gone, or hiding. He turned back to Isaac. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Isaac exhaled slowly, rubbing his face with a calloused hand. "Started about a week ago. First it was little things. Livestock going missing. Fence posts snapped like they were nothing. I thought maybe coyotes or..." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Or people. But then I saw it." He gestured toward the boy's drawing. "Out past the barn one night, tall, thin, on all fours, but wrong." His voice lowered. "It didn't move right, like its bones were loose. It would jerk, then stop, like it was figuring out how to use its own body." Carter frowned. "What about its face?" Isaac's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Didn't see it, not then. It wouldn't come close at first, just watched." Lena finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "It's learning us." Carter glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "It stands in the trees, listens. We hear it sometimes, moving, mimicking. It repeats things we say to each other, but..." She swallowed hard. "Not quite right." A cold weight settled in Carter's gut. Isaac continued. 2 nights ago, I heard it outside our bedroom window. I got up, rifle in hand, and that's when I saw it." He looked at Carter then, something raw and broken in his expression. It was smiling. A beat of silence passed between them. Carter felt the weight of the house pressing in on him, the air thick with something unseen, and then he noticed it, the quiet, not just inside the house, but outside. No insects, no wind, no rustling leaves. Even in the dead of night, the desert was never truly silent. The wind always whispered through the dry grass. Crickets chirped. The distant yips of coyotes echoed. But now, nothing. The world was holding its breath. Carter clenched his jaw. He had never heard a silence like this. Not in all his years patrolling these remote lands. It felt wrong, as if the land itself was trying to stay unnoticed. The boy was still drawing in the dust, slow and methodical. But this time he wasn't sketching the creature. He was drawing the house. And outside the house, just beneath the window, he scratched 2 glowing circles into the dirt. Carter's breath hitched. The boy looked up at him then, wide-eyed. "It's here." The front door creaked. Something was outside. The door groaned, the sound slow and deliberate, as if something was testing it. Carter's hand was on his gun now, fingers tightening around the grip. The boy's drawing sat between them, the twin circles, eyes, etched in the dust just beneath the crude outline of the house. Isaac grabbed his rifle from where it rested against the wall, moving with the quiet precision of a man who had seen his fair share of trouble. Lena remained frozen in her chair, staring at the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Carter stepped forward slowly. He reached for the doorknob, resting his palm against the wood first, feeling for vibrations. Nothing. And then, a sharp tap against the window. Not a knock. Not the hesitant sound of fingers testing the glass. It was harder, heavier, like something pressing too firmly, feeling the barrier between them. The boy whimpered, shrinking back into his mother's arms. Carter flicked his head toward Isaac. "Lights off. Now." Isaac hesitated but moved quickly, flipping the switch. The house was plunged into darkness. The only illumination came from the dim glow of the moon seeping through the curtains. Another tap. Carter edged toward the window, rifle raised, pressing himself against the wall just beneath it. He inhaled deeply, then in one swift motion yanked the curtain aside and raised his gun. Nothing. And then a faint, scuffling sound. Carter's breath hitched. It came from near the barn, low and scraping, like something dragging itself across dry earth. He aimed his flashlight in the direction of the noise. The beam flickered slightly, the light cutting through the night, landing on nothing. The barn door was ajar, swaying just slightly, though there was no wind. "Stay inside," Carter murmured, his voice firm. "Lock the door." Isaac hesitated, but Lena was already grabbing their son, pulling him back. Carter stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his weight, the sound swallowed instantly by the unnatural stillness. His gut told him not to go near that barn, but he needed proof. His cruiser was parked a few yards away, its headlights still cutting across the dirt road. He moved quickly, boots crunching against the dry earth, and popped the trunk. Inside were 2 motion-activated trail cameras, standard issue for property disputes and poaching cases. They weren't military grade, but they'd do the job. He grabbed them, along with a small toolkit, and turned back to the house. Isaac had stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the property. "We're setting these up," Carter told him, "around the house and the barn. I want to see what the hell we're dealing with." Isaac nodded once. He didn't ask questions. They worked in silence, placing the cameras at key points, one near the barn, another on the front porch, one at the tree line where the thing had been seen. As Carter finished adjusting the final camera near the barn, he felt it again. The sensation of being watched. Slowly he turned his head toward the trees. The flashlight beam wavered slightly as it passed over the gnarled branches. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting where they shouldn't. The trees loomed, motionless, then movement. His breath caught. Just for a second, between the trunks, something shifted. A tall, thin silhouette, barely visible, crouched low like a predator in wait. Then it was gone. Carter exhaled sharply, stepping back. He didn't know what unsettled him more, the figure itself or the way it moved. It didn't retreat or run. It simply shifted, like it had never been there at all. He swallowed hard and forced himself back toward the house. Inside the cruiser, he powered up his laptop and connected the cameras. A live feed flickered to life on the screen. The barn, the tree line, the porch, all still. Minutes passed. Carter kept his eyes glued to the screen, watching. And then, a flicker. His jaw clenched. One of the cameras, the one near the barn, had caught something. A blur of movement. He rewound the footage, pressed play. The screen showed the empty barn door, still swaying slightly. Then, there, a figure, moving so fast it was barely more than a smear against the dirt. Thin, long-limbed, sprinting on all fours with impossible speed. Then it was gone. Carter's stomach turned. He hit rewind, watched again. The figure appeared, moved, vanished, and when he rewound again, it wasn't there at all, like it had never been caught on film to begin with. The cruiser radio crackled to life. A voice came through. Isaac's voice. "Officer, you need to come inside now." Carter's head snapped toward the house. The radio crackled again. "Officer, you need to come inside now." The exact same words, the exact same tone, and then, from the house, the exact same voice, calling him inside. Carter's fingers hovered over his radio, his breath coming slow and measured. His training kicked in. Assess, don't react. His eyes flicked between the glowing screen of his laptop, now useless, and the house behind him. "Officer, you need to come inside now." The voice crackled through the radio again, but this time he noticed something. It wasn't quite right. It had all the right parts, the cadence, the inflection, but there was something off. It was too even, too measured, like someone reading from a script but not quite understanding the words. And then, from the house, Isaac's real voice rang out, filled with panic. "Carter, don't come inside." Carter's grip on his gun tightened. Two voices, identical, one inside, one on the radio. His mind raced. If the real Isaac was inside, then whoever or whatever was on the radio. A movement caught his eye. At the edge of the trees, just beyond the range of his cruiser's headlights, something shifted. It was barely a silhouette against the night, its outline flickering like a heat mirage. And then, for the briefest second, the light from his cruiser caught it just right. A body too long, joints bending the wrong way, a head cocked at an unnatural angle, and that smile. Carter clenched his jaw, stepping back toward the house. He kept his gun trained on the figure, but his gut told him bullets wouldn't do much. Not against something like this. The radio crackled again. "Come inside, officer." Isaac's voice again, but there was something new in it this time. A hint of a smirk, like it was playing with him. Carter slammed the door shut behind him, locking it. Inside, Isaac and Lena were backed against the far wall, the boy clinging to his mother's leg. "You heard it, didn't you?" Isaac whispered. Carter nodded, his heart hammering. "It's copying you." Lena shuddered. "It's been doing that for days. The first time it only repeated things we'd already said, but now—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Now it knows." Carter peered out the window again, but the figure was gone. The radio crackled once more. "You should really come outside." The voice was smoother now, less of an imitation, more practiced. Carter shut the radio off. Whatever was out there wasn't just copying them, it was becoming them. A low noise filled the house then, not from the radio, but from just outside the door. A soft, rhythmic clicking sound, like something tapping its fingernails against the wood. And then, "Officer, let us in." Not Isaac's voice, not Lena's, not the boy's. The words were coming from multiple voices at once, layered on top of each other, the sound of an entire family speaking in unison. "Let us in, officer, we're cold." Isaac clutched his rifle tighter. "That's not us." Carter took a slow step toward the door, his stomach twisting. Through the peephole he saw them, Isaac, Lena, the boy, standing on the porch, all three of them smiling, too still, too stiff, their eyes shining too bright in the darkness. His gut screamed at him to run. Carter's breath came shallow as he stared through the peephole. The family outside looked real, down to the wrinkles in Isaac's weathered face, the soft sway of Lena's dark hair in the breeze, the boy's small dust-covered hands. But their movements were too controlled. No nervous shifting, no blinking, no breathing, just standing, just smiling. "Come inside, officer." The voice wasn't coming from their mouths. It hung in the air as if whispered from behind them, moving through their bodies like a puppeteer's strings. Carter took a slow step back, gun raised. "Isaac," he said over his shoulder, voice tight, "get your son and your wife upstairs, now." Isaac didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Lena by the arm, pulling her and the boy toward the staircase. The boy turned back, eyes wide. "They're not us," he whispered. Carter nodded. Outside, the copies didn't react. They just stood there, watching. And then, without warning, they moved, not walked, not ran, dropped. Like marionettes whose strings had been cut, they collapsed onto all fours, their limbs jerking unnaturally, their heads twisting too far. Carter's stomach clenched. The boys drawing. The creature hadn't been standing upright. It had been crawling. A deep, awful crack echoed as the Lena thing twisted its neck at an impossible angle, that smile still stretching, widening. Then the three figures skittered forward. Carter jumped back as they broke open the door. Carter didn't hesitate. He fired. The bullet ripped through Isaac's copy, sending it lurching back, limbs spasming. But it didn't bleed. It barely reacted, just jerked to a stop like a machine resetting itself. Carter fired again. This time Lena's copy dropped flat to the dirt, twisting unnaturally to avoid the shot, its head rotating toward him even as its body slithered forward. They were getting closer. Carter took another step back. Then, heavy footsteps behind him, not from the stairs, from inside the house. Something else was here, something that had never needed to knock. The real threat wasn't outside, it was inside with them. Carter spun, gun raised, scanning the dimly lit room. The door was still locked, the window shut. But he felt it. Something was here. Upstairs, the floor creaked as Isaac and his family moved toward the bedroom. A heavy silence followed. Then, thump. A single, deliberate step. Not from upstairs. From the hallway leading to the back of the house. Carter's grip tightened around the gun. He moved slowly, his boots barely making a sound against the wooden floor. The dim hallway stretched before him, the door at the end slightly ajar. A shadow flickered across the gap. "Where's your son?" he had asked outside. "Inside," the fake Lena had answered. But the boy's last drawing had told a different story. Carter swallowed hard. If the drawings were right, the family outside wasn't real, which meant the real family was already gone. A cold dread curled in his stomach. "Isaac," he called, stepping back toward the stairs. No answer. He took the steps two at a time, reaching the landing just as the bedroom door swung open. Isaac stood there, rifle aimed at him. For a split second, Carter's heart pounded, until he saw the terror in Isaac's face. "They're not us," he breathed. Carter barely had time to register the words before Lena stepped into view behind her husband. But something was wrong. Her face was off. The skin around her mouth was stretched too wide, her lips barely covering her teeth, and her eyes, too bright, too knowing, and then she grinned. "Come inside, officer." Carter's blood ran ice cold. Isaac turned, just in time for Lena's arms to snap unnaturally around his neck, her fingers digging deep into his flesh. His eyes widened in pain, but his voice never made it out. Carter raised his gun, but Isaac's son was behind him, smiling. The child moved first. His small, unnatural fingers lunged for Carter's throat. Carter barely dodged in time, stumbling backward, his mind screaming. Isaac was right. The real family had been gone for hours. What was left of them was just another imitation, and now it wanted him. Carter didn't think, he moved. He barely dodged as the boy thing lunged again, its small hands grasping at his throat with an unnatural, jerky speed. He stumbled back, raising his gun, but the thing wearing Lena's face tilted its head, stepping toward Carter, her arms still stretched too long from where she'd snapped them around her husband's throat. Isaac lay on the ground, unmoving. Not dead. Not yet. Carter fired. The shot slammed into the Lena thing's shoulder, sending it staggering back, but it didn't make a sound. No grunt of pain, no scream. Just a slight twitch like a puppet string being pulled the wrong way. Then it smiled wider. The fake Isaac dropped onto all fours in a single, sickening movement, his limbs snapping into place with sharp, wet cracks. And then they rushed him. Carter fired again, the shot punching into Isaac's stomach, but the thing didn't slow down. It moved too fast. He barely had time to register the motion before the boy copy was already at his side, grabbing his wrist. The touch was wrong, not warm, not cold, just empty, like pressing his skin against a mannequin. Carter yanked free, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He ran, barreling toward the stairs. The creatures didn't follow immediately. They were letting him go, like a game. But as he reached the bottom step, the front door slammed open. More of them. Figures poured inside, moving with those same stiff, unnatural motions. Copies, the neighbors, other people from the town, all wrong, their faces too still, their eyes too bright, their mouths smiling. They blocked the only exit. A new voice joined them, his own. "Nowhere left to run, officer." The sound came from behind him. Carter turned, and something huge rushed toward him from the dark hallway. The real one, the thing that had been outside, the thing that had been waiting. And now it was done playing. Carter barely had time to react. The thing from the hallway lurched forward, its body folding and unfolding like it was still figuring out how to be. It was tall, horribly tall, its limbs stretched thin and too long, its spine curving unnaturally as it moved. The air around it seemed to bend, as if its very presence was warping the space it occupied. And then Carter saw its face. Not human, not entirely. The skin was human. Patchwork flesh stretched over something that wasn't meant to wear it. Its mouth hung open, wide too wide, teeth sharp and jagged, as if forced into a human shape that never quite fit. Its eyes were gone, only pits of deep, empty black remained, and yet it smiled. Carter raised his gun, fired 3 shots into its chest. Nothing. It didn't bleed, didn't flinch. It just laughed. A sound that didn't come from its mouth, but from all around him, like the house itself was laughing with it. The things at the door watched, motionless. The Isaac copy moved first, dropping down on all fours again, its limbs snapping as it twisted toward him. Carter ran. The only way left was backward, toward the kitchen. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at the creature, barely slowing it down. The thing with his own voice called after him. "You can't leave, officer, not yet." His lungs burned. His mind raced. Think, think, think. The door to the back porch. He grabbed for it, ripping it open, and froze. The porch was gone. The entire backyard was different. Not a fence, not trees. Just blackness, a void. The world outside the house had vanished. He turned, heart pounding. The creatures stood at the threshold, watching, waiting. They weren't chasing him anymore. They didn't have to, because the house itself had become the trap. And he had nowhere left to go. Carter's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The night had collapsed, the world outside the house gone, replaced by an endless, swallowing blackness. No sky, no land, just nothing. And behind him the creatures waited. Their smiles stretched wider, their eyes gleaming with something hungry. They didn't move. They didn't need to. He was already caught. Carter's grip on his gun tightened, but deep down, he knew it didn't matter. The thing wearing human skin, the thing that had been watching from the trees, stepped forward. Its limbs folded and twisted as it moved, its joints crackling, and then it spoke. But not in Isaac's voice, not in Lena's, not in the boys'. It spoke in his own voice. "You see it now, don't you?" Carter's pulse thundered. "We don't take lives. We take faces. We take places." The creatures behind him, began to laugh, their voices merging into a single, broken chorus. The copies, the imitations. This wasn't about hunting. It was about replacing. Carter took a slow step back. His boot hit the threshold of the empty blackness behind him. A choice. Stay, or step into the unknown. The thing that wore his voice stepped closer, its jagged grin pulling impossibly wide. "Don't worry, officer, we'll take it from here." And then Carter ran. He lunged toward the only thing left, the blackness, and jumped. Falling, falling. The wind howled past him, but there was no ground, no end, just endless darkness, swallowing him whole. And then, light. The world snapped back into place. Carter found himself in his cruiser, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were white. His breath hitched, his uniform drenched in sweat. The radio crackled. "Dispatch to Officer Carter, status update?" His heart slammed in his chest. The ranch was gone. The road ahead stretched on like it had never been there at all. No house, no barn, no family, just an empty stretch of desert, bathed in the dim glow of dawn. Had it ever been there? His dashcam was still rolling. Hands shaking, he reached for the playback. And there it was. The last recorded frame before he fled. The house, the porch, the family standing in the doorway, and standing behind them, wearing his own face and smiling, was him. Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.